I'm going to take a quick look here at the way in which Mark's Gospel presents Jesus. About 40% of Mark's narrative, that is his entire Gospel, is devoted to Jesus' healing activities. This is roughly about the same percentage Matthew has of healing materials, but then again, Matthew has borrowed or has utilized Mark's narrative. So since Mark was the first Gospel, and the fact that almost 40% of the Gospel is devoted to these healing activities, which includes exorcisms, it just shows how important for Mark it is to present Jesus as a healer. Whereas in Matthew's Gospel, a lot of Jesus is presented as a teacher. That it does occur in Mark, but not nearly to the same degree as it does in Matthew. Now, Mark uses Jesus' healing as evidence of his authority to teach and to proclaim that sins are forgiven. There's a very important passage in Mark's Gospel that kind of links the idea of healing along with the forgiveness of sins, and it's also kind of a controversy story. And so when Jesus pronounces that a man's sins are forgiven, there are some Pharisees who are upset by this claim. What authority does Jesus have to announce this forgiveness of sins? Or if Jesus himself is taking the place of God to forgive sins, what's happening? And in order to demonstrate that he has this authority, either to proclaim or to actually forgive sins, this is demonstrated in being able to heal the man. So healing is seen then as this evidence. It's not just done because Jesus is compassionate, although some healing is done simply because he is compassionate. It is primarily used as support for knowing Jesus' true identity. Now, while Jesus' miracles are conditioned on the presence of faith, his healings might not necessarily be. There's a very interesting passage in Mark 6, 5 through 6, where Jesus goes back to Nazareth, his hometown, and he is surprised by the lack of faith that people there have. And it says that because of their lack of faith, he wasn't able to do any miracles there. However, it does say he's able to heal certain people. So some healing is able to take place, but it doesn't indicate whether or not those who are healed have faith in Jesus or just receive healing. And so this is an interesting question about how the authors of the Bible, other authors of the New Testament, make a connection between faith and healing. Sometimes a person's faith in Jesus is the reason or the rationale why they can become healed. In other cases, a person can become healed and they have no faith in Jesus. So there's not always a link between faith in Jesus and healing by Jesus. Another interesting thing in Mark's Gospel is Mark references that sometimes Jesus touches those he heals. Now, in the ancient culture, touch is not a common thing for healing, but in the ancient cultures, the Greco-Roman, Mediterranean culture, their divine power oftentimes resides in physical objects or in a person, and one has to touch that person or be touched by that person or touch that object in order to receive the divine power. And so we see Jesus healing a leper with touch. Sometimes there are people who make claim that this makes Jesus unclean because he touches a leper. Mark doesn't make anything out of this, that Jesus takes on uncleanness when he touches it. Much more likely to see that Jesus' power to heal comes from him and goes to the leper. And also a blind man, blind Bartimaeus, is healed because of Jesus' touch. So Mark raises this issue that this is one way in which Jesus heals, but Jesus also heals by words. And in ancient cultures, healing by magic was done with words, oftentimes with kind of incantations or with some kind of formula. Now, we don't see Jesus using anything like this any type of incantation. We're not sure if what he does say to certain people is a formula, but he does make statements about, once again, their faith has saved them. And so, but that doesn't seem to be the words that are necessary in order for the person to be healed. And I have the word magic in quotes there because magic is sometimes seen as a derisive term. That is, someone performs magic when their healing is not coming from a divine source or not coming from God. And healing is called healing. It is not described as magic because it's thought to come from God. So magic is sometimes seen as that which is opposed to God. It's sometimes presented in the biblical text as something that is antithetical to the work of God. But nevertheless, that there is some kind of power that's there that resides with the magician or those who perform something by magic. One of the big questions that deals with Mark's view of Jesus as a healer is the question of whether or not Jesus is being presented by Mark as some kind of Greco-Roman theos aner. So this is a Greek expression, theos being God, aner meaning man, so a man of God. And so in the ancient Greco-Roman world, there are these men of God, man of God, who can perform miraculous deeds. And is Mark trying to write to his Gentile audience to present Jesus in line with somehow, or reflective or parallel with the kind of theos aner that might have been popular at the time that the gospel was written? It's not very clear, and so scholars are kind of debating whether or not Mark really does intend to do this. But surely in Mark's gospel, Jesus is presented as Son of God. The centurion recognizes Jesus as Son of God, and so this recognizes that Jesus is somehow or another connected to divine power in what he does and what he teaches. And so a little insight about Jesus as a healer in Mark.